Hey, this is Anney.
And Samantha.
And welcome to Stuff I Never Told You, a production of iHeartRadio. And it is time for another edition of Female First, which means we are once again joined by the resilient, the definitely not, probably not a zombie, Yves. Welcome, Yves.
Thank you. I do not wish to be a zombie, so.
Wait, I like that you had to put that. I do not wish.
I do not wish. I just want everybody to know that I don't want that for myself.
That's a fair caveat. We should probably explain. You have been feeling ill for a little bit, right, Yves?
Yes.
Yes. And we were discussing before, and there are just some things that my horror movie brain was like, this sounds a little like zombies.
Yes. And I was trying to reassure Anney that I'm not a zombie. I'm not like infected by any spores, because I know that I got whatever illness that I had from the cleaning I was doing and the dust that was kicked up from that cleaning. And my body was trying to expel it. I was pretty sick, had a fever, all kinds of symptoms for a week, and it really took me out. But like, I'm here now. I feel fully alive. I feel like I'm not going to try to like eat anybody. I'm not going to try to attack anybody. I don't have any of those feelings right now. I don't feel inherently changed. I feel like I would say that if I was a zombie, but at the same time, I'm all here. So I think we're okay.
Thus far, you're all here. I will say, maybe you're just allergic to cleaning. Just say it.
Oh, wow. That sounds like such a, you're trying to get somebody to clean and they're like, oh, I'm allergic. Can't do that.
But there are so many different allergies, many of them surprising and necessary to things people are allergic to that seem like they would be necessary to functioning in life. And it probably exists. I don't want to say that doesn't exist, because I know for my thing, I was quote unquote allergic to exercise. That's why I would start itching when I would have exercise-induced urticaria. I mean, so I don't know.
That's true though, right? Because some people get there's asthma, but also sweat makes you itch and stuff like that.
Yeah, I did that one time. My face blew up. My roommate got real scared. She's like, I gotta go get you some Benadryl. I was like, yeah, you gotta give me some Benadryl.
Benadryl? I once had a very, very severe allergic reaction. And through a comedy of errors that could have gone really terribly, I couldn't get to a doctor. And I just took some Benadryl and I was like, hopefully this does it. And it did. So now Benadryl is a thing that I always carry with me.
It does help. It does help.
Allergies are good reminders of how fragile we are as humans.
Really
They're like, hey, can't handle a little pollen? Just a reminder.
And it's everywhere. No, it's completely necessary to the sustenance of life. But can it kill you? Maybe.
That's the fun of it. That's the fun and misery of it all. Well, have you been up to anything other than being sick, Yves, since we last spoke?
Oh, since we last spoke, I believe so. I'm really trying to remember because we're in May now. I think after the last time we spoke, that was after I went to Guatemala. I think I've been kind of chill since then. I have really been about staying in place. And I have been just with my head down working. So I don't really think there are many updates since the last time we spoke.
Okay. I feel like you could have a whole "Where in the world is Yves?" I never know what you're going to say when we ask this, so it's great.
Yeah, no, I needed to stay. I needed to keep my feet on solid ground for a second, and I still do. Okay. And I have some travel coming up, and I'm like this week, next week, a lot of travel. I signed myself up for more travel. I just got word today there is a lottery for seeing synchronized fireflies in the Great Smoky Mountains, and I got into the lottery, so I'll finally get to see them after wanting to see them at a different national park for a minute that I always forget the lottery for every year. And I'm like, oh, dang it. I always miss it. And I missed it again this year after setting a reminder. But then I was like, I could just do it in the Smoky Mountains. I realized that. So but like I keep this month is very like jam-packed of like family obligations, graduation, things like that. So I've been really feeling like I need to stay here. And when I do go away, it's got to be for a little bit of time because I'm about to like be gone for a little bit in June.
Well, congratulations. That's awesome.
I'm jealous. I forgot about that
you.
because I
Yeah.
did I had a really good friend who was a hiking enthusiast and loved to do camping and hikes. And they were like, we have to come back. You will love this. It's magical. Man.
Yeah.
Yes.
I
I can't wait to hear about it.
Yeah, it's going to be like a Miyazaki movie is kind of what I'm imagining it. I don't know.
That's so
But I'm excited that I finally remembered because I would try to sign up for the one in Congaree in South Carolina.
Mhm.
That's the national park in South Carolina, and they have it there as well. But it was just before the one in the Great Smoky Mountains, and I was right on time in remembering. So I got to sign up for the lottery and fortunately got in. So yeah,
That's so cool.
Love it.
If anybody else listening knows about any sort of like specific natural phenomenon that only happens ever so often in like whatever landscape, terrain, where you are, please let me know because I'm trying to find more things like this. And it's kind of hard to Google. I tried to Google it, but the internet has no idea what my request is. So
I was going to say, I get some like videos from my FYP or TikTok and such, but it's always like a week after. And I was like, well, damn.
Yeah.
That happened.
that's
That's
unfortunate.
usually what happens to me.
It's like, you're not working, algorithm.
Right. Like this is not the way this works.
Mhm.
Right. You have brought us quite a wide-ranging story today. So who are we talking about today, Yves?
Today we're talking about Hariette Shelton Dover. And I actually, this was born from travel because I was looking for people in Washington and in the Seattle area. And I also wanted to talk about more Indigenous people in these female first episodes. So like it really worked out well, but this actually was born of travel. So yeah, we're talking about Hariette Shelton Dover today. And she was the first woman chair of the Tulalip Tribe's Board of Directors. And also in Hariette's autobiography, she also says that she thinks that what she wrote was the first history of Tulalip written by a Tulalip Indian. So that is another first that she said that she had. And I said Indian because she preferred to use the terms Indian and American Indian. Throughout the episode, whenever that comes up, I'll probably say Native American or Indigenous people or something like that. But Hariette herself did prefer to use those terms.
And she did all kinds of stuff. She really, really, I was reading like, whoa. And so now we're over here. So let's get into it, Yves. Want to start with the history?
Yeah. So Hariette was born on November 19th, 1904 to William Shelton and Ruth C. Home. They were from different tribes, but Hariette herself was born on the Tulalip Reservation at Mission Beach in Tulalip Bay. And that's near Marysville, Washington. So the Tulalip tribes are a confederation that includes Snohomish, Skykomish, Snoqualmie, and many other tribes that were successors to the ones that signed the Treaty of Point Elliott in 1855. So her dad was also the last hereditary Snohomish tribal chief in Tulalip. He worked at the local mill and as a general mechanic, but he was also just a very important person and did lots of community work. Hariette was the youngest of 6 children, and she said that her home as a child was a 3-room house that her father called a cottage, and it was on the old Tulalip Mission School grounds. So her father had a history going to the mission school, but once Hariette was in the picture, the school was no longer in existence. Hariette mostly spoke the Snohomish dialect of the Coast Salish language in her younger years. As a child, she would collect firewood, pick berries. She learned to do things that her family taught her how to do that were traditional. Like she learned to smoke salmon, and she was baptized as a Catholic. But Native Americans couldn't go to public schools, and her dad didn't want her to go to the mission school. So Hariette ended up going to the reservation's government-run Tulalip boarding school when she was 7 years old. And there is a lot that's said about her experiences at the boarding school. She talks about it in her autobiography. It was standard that like all the students were assigned an ID number. Hariette's was 33. They wore uniforms. They started the day with the roll call and exercise and ended at 9 p.m. sharp. They would have like inspections on Saturdays. They couldn't speak their native languages at the boarding school. And I was watching, there is a short documentary about Hariette, and there's a clip in there of an interview with Hariette, and she is talking about an experience that she had when she was 9 years old, and a friend and her were speaking in her native language, and they got in trouble for it. So they were like whispering to each other. They were overheard, and she was beaten from her neck to her ankles. So the back of her neck to her ankles is how they describe it. So she was hit pretty hard. It was described that like in her tribal culture, it wasn't the case that the kids were like punished in ways. There wasn't really physical punishment. There were no beatings as part of punishment and raising a child and disciplining them. But it was in her school, and she seems to have been very affected by that beating. Like she says, she remembers it to that day, and said that she was really hurt by it to that day. So it definitely affected her, but I would imagine more so because she was speaking her language. And the way she described it was like, I loved the language. It sounded great. I wanted to speak it with her at that time. And it was for that simple fact that they were beat for it. But in February of 1917, Hariette's sister Ruth was sent home because she was sick. Hariette soon also got sick and was sent home. Ruth unfortunately died of tuberculosis in May. Hariette got better, but she ended up kind of lagging in her education. She finished at the boarding school in 1922. When she got out of the boarding school, she says in her autobiography, she was like, she swore she was never going back to church again because she had been in church all the time and was praying all the time. Her mother was pretty devout, and she was disappointed because, you know, her mother was in church every Sunday, and Hariette was like, I'm not doing that again. But Hariette did say that there was a lot of pressure on the Native Americans from the Christians. This is a quote from her autobiography. Hariette said, "Those poor misguided people, they were bound and determined to save all of our miserable souls." If people have heard anything about this time period and about how Native Americans were treated by white folks and by Christians, it was a lot of talk and action of trying to civilize people in Native American tribes, trying to get them to assimilate, punishing them for taking part in their traditional culture, in their religions, in their language, in the clothing that they were wearing, in the actions that they were taking, like what they did as far as lifestyle, making them farmers, things like that. There was a lot of doing their best to, in harmful ways, separate them from all aspects of their traditional identities. So that was part of that. And Hariette briefly talked about that from a religious perspective in her autobiography. But Hariette did end up graduating from Everett High School in 1926, and she said that high school was a better experience than boarding school was. She didn't care for the boarding school experience that much, but it was definitely a formative time for her. So Hariette had dreams of going to college, but she didn't end up going to college at this time. Okay, that's a little bit of foreshadowing. So she was involved in her community, though. As we said earlier, her father was also very involved in the community. By 1923, her brother Robert was working with the Tulalip Improvement Club, and he was preparing claims and complaints against the government about fraudulent sales of native land, their loss of fishing rights, and lack of medical care. And Hariette would type up the testimonies of elderly natives, and she recorded meeting minutes. So she was already working as this kind of Tulalip historian, gathering stories, documenting people's stories. In 1926, she met Francis, a.k.a. Frank Williams, at a dance event in Seattle. Now, Hariette's mom was a little concerned that Hariette didn't know him well enough. But the two of them, Frank and Hariette, still got married in July of 1926. Only Francis's cousin was a witness for their marriage. Hariette's parents were not there, but they still moved into an apartment together. And later in 1928, they had a son together named Wayne Williams. But it didn't seem like she had the best experience in their marriage. She was described as being lonely, homesick. Sometimes Frank would send money to his mother, but it didn't seem like Hariette was always so supported. He had a temper, apparently, didn't always trust her while he was away working, but their marriage was strained, is what it came down to. They didn't end up divorcing at this time, but they did divorce many years later. When Hariette's brother died in 1930, suddenly, the Snohomish tribe voted Hariette in to replace him as secretary. Eventually, the org became the Northwest Federation of American Indians. Then it was the Tulalip Tribal Council. And that council focused on bettering Native environments and welfare. And at that point, it had 5 members, but then it evolved to become the board of directors, and it had 7 members. But so Frank, before they ended up getting divorced, Frank had gotten a job with the Washington State Ferry System, but then he ended up getting laid off. Technology was changing. The old steamships were being phased out. And Hariette ended up moving back in with her parents. So all the while, Hariette is working different jobs. And eventually she was elected to serve on the Tulalip Tribe's board of directors. So she served in the board from 1938 to 1942, then 1944 to 1946, and later 1950 to 1951. But so Hariette's also working. She's working different jobs over the course of this year. So she was at a job at a restaurant in Seattle that was called Twin Teepees, which had a lot of like cheesy Native American themed decor. In September of 1942 to around 1945, she was working a job at the Boeing plant in Seattle. But she also served as the chair on the board of directors for a year in about 1945 or 1946. And this is her first. It made her the first Native American woman to be in that position. She was also working at a post office on the reservation. By 1949, she was. And this is where she met a man named George Dover, because he would come by to pick up mail for his family members. And once again, Hariette's family members didn't really approve of George, but she still married him in 1950. They had a son named William Dover, and they stayed married until George's death in 1969. So Hariette did a lot. So she also served as a tribal judge in 1951. She served on the Marysville School Board. She was also a teacher's aide and a lecturer on Native American culture. So she would go to different classrooms and talk about her culture and bring some of her artifacts along with her. She was the first PTA president at Tulalip Elementary School after it opened, thanks to her donating some of her own land. She was also a member of the Seattle Historical Society, and she gave testimony for United States versus Washington Phase 1 in 1973, which was a salmon fishing rights case. And so one notable, a lot of stuff is notable about her legacy, but one really big thing that she did was the salmon ceremony that they held in their tribe was outlawed, but Hariette was involved in bringing back the tradition. So in 1970, Hariette and a group of other people gathered to talk about the salmon ceremony and bringing it back. They met for several weeks. So Hariette herself hadn't been at it and put on a salmon ceremony before. But as the group of people, they were collectively gathering information that they had. So what they remembered growing up, what they knew of and heard of their family doing, they would get together and talk about it. They ended up finalizing the run of ceremony based on what they could remember their families would do. And then Hariette went to a board of directors meeting, and the board said that they would appropriate some money for the ceremony. Said it was basically like, she was like, okay, it's official now. This must happen. Hariette and the other planners determined that they would hold the ceremony in June when it was high tide, and they did. So she was instrumental in bringing the salmon ceremony back. In her autobiography, it was mentioned that Hariette didn't really want to include her role in bringing the salmon ceremony back. And that was because she didn't want to sound like she was gloating about it. It seemed like she was pretty reserved about certain things, or liked to be modest about certain things, because it's also mentioned in her autobiography that like she preferred to speak in the passive voice rather than the active voice. So in general, her speaking her own tribal language was a big part of how she saw the world. She cared about it a lot, and it was instrumental in understanding how she interacted with people and communicated with people. So like the way that she would prefer to speak was in passive voice, because active voice felt a little bit too direct for her. And that was something that was taken into consideration as they were figuring out how to put the autobiography together. But anyway, we'll come back to the autobiography in just a moment. But in 1976, Hariette ended up going to Everett Community College. And at first she was like, it's been a long time since I've been in school. It's been like 50 years. Like, I can go back to college. Do I want to go back to college? But she did end up going back for a few reasons. At this point, tribal members could enroll at the local community college and be funded by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. The federal government could no longer keep tribal members from getting an education at these colleges due to change in the relocation and termination programs. And Hariette wanted to be a role model to young folks in this regard. And she also wanted more education so that she would be able to write a history of the Tulalip Reservation. So she majored in anthropology and history, and she took classes with Darlene Fitzpatrick. They ended up developing a friendship, and Darlene helped Hariette in the recording, editing, organizing the narratives for her life for the autobiography. So Darlene also talks about Hariette in the autobiography if you read it. But yeah, Hariette graduated with her associate's degree in 1978. And she was on the council for about 14 years. Over the years, she also worked as a domestic servant for families. She would also speak with people on other reservations about how their lives were and how they were changed after the treaties were signed. She collected materials about Tulalip history, and she did research. And she began working on the manuscript for the book around 1981 and they were taping her narratives for a couple of years. And in her later life, Hariette spent time teaching other people her language, Lashutsi, and she dedicated a lot of her time to going out in the community and making sure that her language and cultural history were preserved. She did end up getting breast cancer, and she died when she was 86 years old in February of 1991. So many of the Shelton family's artifacts are at the Hebel Cultural Center. And Hariette's life is documented in the book Tulalip from My Heart, an autobiographical account of a reservation community. Yeah, it's a book that was published after she passed away, but it was also in her own words, because she was able to document that and record it before she passed away. So it seems to be like it's a real treasure. As I said at the beginning of the episode, she said that it was, the only one written by, other accounts of Tulalip were written by white people, basically. So she said that it was the first history of Tulalip written by a Tulalip Indian. So definitely worth reading, and an amazing thing to have, because it's like clear how much love and thoughtfulness was put into the autobiography, even down to the way that they the syntax of it and the way that they structured sentences, because she liked to speak in longer sentences and really disliked short sentences. And so because of that reason, they wrote the more longer sentences in the book. And also, they were really thoughtful about how they were presenting the timeline. So she didn't really want to do it completely chronologically, even though there was a little bit of pushback from the publisher in that way. They really felt it was necessary to, because of the way time is interwoven and the way that they think about time, necessary to not go 100% in a linear chronological fashion, but instead documented how Hariette would have documented it, which is saying, well, this is a topic, this is something that happened at one moment in time, but this is the history of it, or this is what it links back to in my history and in our history. And that's evident through the way that they organized the autobiography. So yes, Hariette had a rich history, and it is documented in the autobiography and the documentary that you can find online about her.
I love that the autobiography exists, because having that in her own words, we've talked about that so many times, about how valuable that is. But I'm also a huge language nerd, so I love thinking about that kind of stuff, about how the language shapes the way you think. And that's not to say you can think outside of that, but it is really interesting how it shapes your thoughts. And so I'm really glad that she was a force, and we're gonna make sure this language and this traditions and these cultures and all of that which were erased in this, or attempted to be erased in this horrible way, we're going to make sure that they're preserved. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that they're preserved. So I'm just grateful that it's one of those things where it's I hate that she had to do it, but I'm grateful that she was there to do it.
It's interesting because we've talked about the extinct languages, especially when it comes to native languages, and how they have been forcefully erased and being taken out altogether, just forgotten. And I love that she had the foresight, because honestly, it took a lot of other people a lot longer to realize what was happening. That's where she understood pretty quickly what was going down and what the white people were doing. They're yeah, they're trying to erase us initially, and just talking about how important it was to preserve that. Also, she is an obvious writer. She's like, no, this can't be chronological order. We need to change this up. It has to be different. I'm like, oh, so you're not just a teacher historian. You're a storyteller, so much among the like Native peoples, and understanding this is how it goes, and I want to write it this way. Also, I'm a big fan of long sentences, as you can tell.
I am too.
Yeah, me too. And she also talks about in her autobiography how like she learned things because they were passed down orally. And that's also how she was like transmitting her story. Yeah. And I think it's also just really inspirational to see people who are committed to preserving history, because that's not everybody that like thinks about in real time what something's value is in the long term. You have to have like a long view on things to think about that. So it's like, okay, I have this belt and I saved it because I know that it's going to be important to the preservation of my tribes, my community's cultural history. And that should be saved for other people in the future to enjoy, and also for them to be able to learn about their own history, because it's important. It's so easy to just go on about your life, have it be rote, and not in real time understand the weight of artifacts and the weight of how things are changing. Because I imagine over the course of her life, she saw a lot of change. She experienced a lot of change. And she also heard about a lot of change from her elders and from her grandparents. She said in her book, she was like, yeah, my parents loved me, but like I had like 3 grandmothers who lived in the area, like close to me. And they just really loved on me, is what she said. So, she had a lot of clearly respect and reverence for preserving cultural history. And it's so important to have people who come to that calling, because if it weren't for them, then this wouldn't exist in the first place. And I imagine she inspired many other people to do similar kind of preservation and historical work, and go and continue the quest for education and knowledge, no matter how old you are in life, was clearly, part of a way that she inspired people. So, yeah, I think that's a nice part of her legacy to reflect on.
Right. No, that's just such an amazing, like, we just celebrated Mother's Day, and that's kind of that tale of like showing love shows it comes out differently, and sharing your heritage and being proud of your heritage and your background, and wanting to make sure that it's preserved through your children, and that your children can learn that love as well as a way. Like, that's so beautiful. It's very touching.
Yeah, it really is.
It takes work. It takes dedication. This is not the same level, but I remember when the pandemic first happened, I was like, I'm going to document all of this. I'm going to everything. And like 2 weeks later, I was like, it's too much.
I've got my feels. I'll tell them about the feels.
But it is like, it takes like not only the foresight and the like caring, but it's work. Mm-hmm. It is work and dedication. Mm-hmm. So I'm glad that she was there to do it.
Me too.
And that we could have this conversation today, Yves. As always, yes. We love talking to you and learning these stories. Thank you so much, as always, for being here. Where can the good listeners find you?
Y'all can find me at my website. First and foremost, you can get to everything from there pretty much. And that is yvesjeffcoat.com. That's spelled YVESJEFFCOAT.com. You can sign up for my newsletter there. You can get to my Instagram from there. You can get to my YouTube from there, all of that. But you can also go directly to me on Instagram. I'm at Not Apologizing. You can also go to many other episodes of Female First here on Stuff Mom Never Told You, about plenty of other people in history with fascinating stories about the things that they accomplished and how they were pioneers.
Yes. Yes, please, listeners, go check out all that stuff if you haven't already. Yves, can't wait to check back in to see what's up next time we talk to you.
Me too.
But in the meantime, listeners, you can contact us if you would like. You can email us at hello@stuffInevertoldyou.com. You can find us on Blue Sky, at Mom Stuff Podcast, or on Instagram and TikTok at Stuff I Never Told You. We're also on YouTube. We have a TeePublic store, and we have a book you can get wherever you get your books. Thanks, as always, to our super producer, Christina, our executive producer, Maya, and our contributor, Joey.
Thank you.
And thanks to you for listening. Stuff I Never Told You is produced by iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, you can check out the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to your favorite shows.